The millionaire had always thought of dining out as a routine part of his schedule, not something that carried any sense of risk. He frequented expensive restaurants where the staff was trained to perfection. The ambiance was carefully maintained, and the clientele was carefully filtered to ensure safety and exclusivity. That night, he chose a quiet establishment tucked away in the city's upscale district. He entered confidently, acknowledging the maître d' with a nod, and was guided to a corner table where he preferred to sit, away from prying eyes and interruptions. He ordered as usual, thinking nothing of it, never suspecting that the most unassuming person in the room would change the course of his evening. Asterisk. The waitress approached his table, balancing her pad and pen with practiced grace. She was new, or at least unfamiliar to him. Her crisp black uniform was neatly pressed, but her eyes seemed restless, darting quickly between customers and back toward the kitchen doors. She had a calm smile fixed in place, the kind servers learned to wear. But there was a heaviness behind it, as though she carried a secret she was desperate to keep hidden. He noticed her hesitation when she set down the menu. For a brief moment, her hand lingered longer than it should have. Then, with a subtle shift of her fingers, she slid the menu toward him, tucked inside with a napkin that didn't quite belong there. Asterisk. He thought little of it at first, assuming it was a mistake. But as he unfolded the napkin, his casual demeanor faltered. The words written in uneven, hurried strokes leaped out at him. Just run. It's a trap. Asterisk. His pulse quickened. He stared at the note, trying to process its meaning. Was it a prank? Someone's dark joke? Or was this waitress warning him of something imminent? Something he couldn't yet see? His mind searched for answers, but the message was too direct, too urgent, to be brushed off lightly. He looked up at her, but she had already turned away, her posture unremarkable as she took an order at another table. If not for the note in his hand, no one would have guessed that she had just passed him a message that could save his life. Asterisk. The millionaire glanced around the room, studying the atmosphere he had moments ago considered safe. For the first time, he noticed details that unsettled him. A group of men sat near the exit, their menus untouched, their eyes shifting toward him in ways that felt unnatural. Their quiet presence carried weight, and their collective attention now seemed to explain the urgency behind the waitress's warning. His mind connected the dots and silenced the men, their behavior, the note. This wasn't random. Something was planned, and he was at the center of it. Asterisk. As he tried to maintain composure, he folded the napkin back into the menu, careful not to draw attention. Every movement now felt magnified. He could feel his heart drumming against his chest as he considered his next step. He knew instinctively that confronting anyone, especially the waitress, was too dangerous. Whatever trap had been laid, she had chosen to warn him quietly, risking exposure. That act alone suggested she was caught between fear and courage, a position that carried its own peril. Asterisk. When she passed his table again, her tray filled with glasses of water for another group. She glanced at him without meeting his eyes. Under her breath, so low that it might have been mistaken for nothing more than a hum, she whispered, "Don't ask questions. Just leave." The words, though fleeting, sealed the weight of the note. This was not a misunderstanding. This was real. He leaned back in his chair, forcing himself to appear calm. Every instinct told him to act immediately, but he also knew the wrong move could trigger the very danger he now sensed. The waitress had done her part. She had given him the warning, and now it was up to him to act wisely. For a man used to boardrooms, contracts, and investments, the stakes had suddenly shifted into something primal, survival. Asterisk. The weight of her decision did not escape him. She could have remained silent, allowed events to unfold as planned, and walked away without putting herself in jeopardy. Instead, she had chosen to intervene, slipping him a lifeline written in hurried strokes across a napkin. It was an act of defiance against whatever forces lingered in the shadows of that restaurant, and an act of humanity that carried unknown consequences. He knew, as he stared at the quiet figure of the waitress moving between tables, that this single moment would alter everything that came after. He sat still, the napkin folded tightly in his palm, and tried to focus on his breathing. The words "just run, it's a trap" echoed in his head, making it hard to think straight. At first he wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, but when his eyes swept across the restaurant, unease settled deeper into his chest. Everything seemed normal on the surface, the gentle hum of conversations, the occasional clinking of silverware, the faint music playing softly from overhead speakers. Yet beneath it all, there was something wrong, something he had missed when he first walked in. Asterisk. Near the entrance, a group of men had arrived not long after him. They weren't ordering food, not even drinks. Instead, they sat scattered at two tables, pretending to glance at menus that they never opened. Their posture was stiff, their attention too focused. He noticed one man's gaze shifting repeatedly toward him, then toward the waitress who had given him the warning, and then back again. Another tapped his foot nervously under the table, his hand brushing against the edge, as though feeling for something hidden. It wasn't the casual behavior of people out for dinner. It was the sharp, controlled presence of men waiting for a signal. Asterisk. The millionaire shifted slightly in his chair, trying to appear calm, but his mind sharpened with alarm. He had been in enough negotiations and high-risk deals to recognize when eyes were tracking him. This wasn't curiosity or admiration. It was the kind of watchfulness that meant intent. Their attention was narrowed in on him, like predators circling prey. Suddenly, the waitress's hurried message wasn't just a cryptic no-tit. It was confirmation of danger he could now see unfolding before him. Asterisk, the longer he observed, the clearer the pattern became. Every time he reached for his glass, he could feel one pair of eyes flick toward the movement. Each time he shifted his posture, another man adjusted his own, as though testing a reaction. These weren't coincidences. They were watching him carefully, waiting for the right moment. A few times he tried to convince himself it was nothing more than imagination, but the consistency of their focus dismantled that hope. Asterisk, what unnerved him further was the way the men communicated. No words, no gestures, but the subtle flick of an eyebrow or the tightening of a jaw passed between them like invisible cues. They were patient, disciplined, the type who didn't need to talk aloud to be understood. That patience made him realize this wasn't something spontaneous. It was planned. They had chosen the location, timed their entrance, and waited for him to arrive. His wealth and reputation had always carried admiration from some and resentment from others tonight. It appeared to have painted a target on his back. Asterisk, he shifted his gaze once more to the waitress. She carried herself carefully, deliberately keeping her movements ordinary. Yet every so often her eyes darted toward the men at the entrance. She knew something. She had seen them, recognized their presence for what it was, and decided to take a risk by warning him. That choice gave him just enough time to piece together the truth. Asterisk, one of the men leaned slightly forward, pretending to study a menu, but the millionaire noticed the unmistakable bulge beneath his jacket. The realization tightened his stomach. This was no simple attempt at intimidation, it was something more dangerous. He imagined the scenario if he hadn't received the note. He might have stayed comfortably at his table, unaware, until the moment arrived when standing up would no longer be an option. Asterisk, as he sat there, he forced himself to recall his business training. The way he had navigated hostile negotiations or tense moments when millions were at stake. The principle was the same. Remain calm, stay observant, and act only when the timing was right. Yet unlike those boardrooms, this wasn't about financial loss or contractual disputes. This was his life, and the stakes could not be higher. Asterisk, the waitress passed close again, refilling glasses at the table beside him. For a second, her hand trembled, spilling a few drops, though she quickly steadied herself. He noticed how her gaze flicked again toward the group of men, then back to him, as though silently urging him not to waste the window of opportunity she had created. He felt the weight of her warning settle on him fully. She had recognized the trap and had taken the unimaginable risk of slipping him that message. Without her, he would still be oblivious to the watchful eyes waiting for him to make the wrong move. Asterisk, the tension in the restaurant now felt like a thick veil. Every second stretched longer than it should. Each glance, each shift in posture, each whisper of movement added to the certainty that the waitress's note had not been an exaggeration. He was being watched, cornered quietly in a room full of people who had no idea what was happening. And while everyone else dined peacefully, unaware of the danger in their midst, he alone sat with the knowledge that he was a marked man. The millionaire's fingers tightened around the edge of his phone as though it were a lifeline. He had read the note, studied the suspicious men, and heard the waitress whisper her warning. Now the question wasn't whether there was a trap, it was how to get out before it closed around him. Panic threatened to surge through him, but years of business negotiations had taught him how to mask his emotions. He forced his expression into calm neutrality, even though every nerve in his body screamed at him to move faster. Asterisk, he tapped his phone screen and lifted it to his ear, pretending to answer a call. His voice was low and casual, carrying just enough volume for anyone nearby to hear. "Yes, I'm finishing up now," he murmured, as though speaking to an assistant or driver. It was a performance, and he knew it. The phone gave him a reason to stand, a reason to walk out without raising suspicion. If the men were waiting for him to make a move, he wanted them to think this one was ordinary. Asterisk, sliding his chair back, he rose steadily, slipping his jacket over his shoulders. His movements were deliberate, unhurried, almost lazy. He wanted to give the impression of a man with no concerns, no hint that he suspected anything. His mind, however, was sharp with calculation. Every step toward the door felt like walking a tightrope. One wrong shift, one misplaced glance, and everything could unravel. Asterisk, he adjusted his tie and began to walk. The men near the entrance noticed, their eyes snapping toward him. He kept his gaze forward, pretending to stay absorbed in his phone conversation. "Yes, I'll be there shortly," he said into the device, each word carrying a false sense of routine. His pace was steady, neither rushed nor hesitant, designed to leave no opening for them to act immediately. Asterisk, the waitress crossed his path briefly as she headed toward another table, her tray balanced high. Without looking directly at him, she tilted her head ever so slightly toward the door, as if reminding him not to falter. He caught the gesture in his peripheral vision and felt a surge of gratitude. She had given him the warning, and now she was silently guiding him through the escape. Asterisk, as he passed one of the men, His peripheral vision caught a subtle shift. The man straightened in his chair, setting the menu aside, his muscles tensing as though readying himself. The millionaire's pulse hammered, but he didn't break character. Into his phone he continued, "Yes, I'll meet you out front. Just wait by the car." His voice was smooth, even hiding the storm beneath it. The door loomed just a few steps ahead. The weight of the room pressed against him, every eye he imagined locked on his back. When he pushed the glass door open, the cool rush of night air swept across his face, and for the first time in several minutes, he allowed himself a controlled breath. The outside world felt like freedom compared to the suffocating tension he had left behind. He didn't stop. Moving briskly, he walked toward his car parked a short distance away. His key fob clicked, unlocking the sleek vehicle with a soft flash of lights. He opened the door and slid inside, shutting it quickly behind him. The leather seat cradled him as he started the engine, the sound breaking the silence of the street. Before pulling away, he risked one glance back through the restaurant's glass front. The group of men was on their feet now, their chairs pushed back roughly, frustration visible in their movements. Their heads turned toward the door he had just exited, their expressions twisted with irritation. Whatever they had planned had been disrupted, and he knew without a doubt that the waitress's warning had made all the difference. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he pulled the car out of its space and drove off into the night. The city lights blurred past, but his mind remained fixed on the events inside that restaurant. He had walked away unscathed because he had trusted the instinct to believe a stranger's note. Without it, he might still be sitting inside, oblivious to the danger that lurked behind polite menus and calm expressions. The escape was quiet, almost anticlimactic in its execution, but he understood the truth of it. A trap had been set, and he had slipped through its teeth only because one woman, the waitress who risked everything, had chosen to warn him. Each turn of the wheel took him farther from the danger, but the memory of that narrow walk to the door stayed sharp in his mind, reminding him how close he had come to being caught. The millionaire drove aimlessly for nearly an hour, his grip still tight on the steering wheel long after the danger had passed. He couldn't shake the thought of the waitress, the woman who had slipped him the note, who had whispered the warning when no one else dared to. Her face lingered in his memory, not because of her uniform or her practiced smile, but because of the courage hidden behind her eyes. She had seen something, known something, and made a choice that carried weight far beyond a typical night's work in a restaurant. By the time he finally pulled into his private garage, his body ached from the tension he had carried. He shut off the engine, sat in silence, and stared at the folded napkin he had placed on the passenger seat. The words were still there, hurried but sharp, etched in ink and urgency. Just run. It's a trap. It was evidence of a moment that had already begun to blur into unreality. Without it, he might have convinced himself the entire ordeal had been nothing more than paranoia. But the note was tangible, proof that someone had risked everything to intervene. The next day, he couldn't resist returning to the restaurant, not to eat, but to find her, to ask her why. He walked in, expecting to see her moving briskly between tables, tray in hand, eyes sharp and cautious as before, but she wasn't there. Instead, a different waitress greeted him, one who spoke politely but without recognition of the tension that had unfolded the night before. When he asked discreetly about the woman who had served him, the manager's reply was unsettling in its simplicity. "She doesn't work here anymore." He pressed further, but the manager only shook his head, unwilling or perhaps unable to give details. It was as though she had vanished overnight, erased from the staff list and replaced without hesitation. The millionaire left with more questions than answers. Was she dismissed because she had interfered? Or had she chosen to disappear, fearing retribution for warning him? The thought haunted him. If she had ties to the men who had been waiting for him, her warning was an act of betrayal against them, one that would not go unnoticed. If she had simply overheard a plan, she might have become a target herself, after letting him slip away. Either way, her absence was not a coincidence. He had escaped, but what had it cost her? That question stayed with him in the days and weeks that followed. Every time he looked at the napkin, he imagined the possibilities. Perhaps she had family who depended on her, and she had risked not just her job but their safety as well. Perhaps she had recognized him as more than just a customer and felt compelled to act on instinct, knowing that a man like him was walking into danger he couldn't see. Or perhaps she had simply been in the wrong place at the right time, and her conscience hadn't allowed her to remain silent. For a man who had spent years building wealth and influence, the encounter shifted something inside him. Deals, contracts, investments, these had always been the battles he fought. Yet none of those victories compared to the quiet power of a single handwritten warning. His survival had not come from his fortune, his connections, or his reputation. It had come from a stranger who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. The mystery of her disappearance only deepened the impact. He tried once more to track her down, discreetly asking contacts in the area, but no one seemed to know her well. She had been just another employee in a revolving door of restaurant staff, overlooked until the night she stepped out of that role and changed the trajectory of his life. The millionaire came to accept that he might never know her reasons, never fully understand the danger he had been spared. Yet in the quiet moments, when he replayed the scene in his mind, he understood enough. She had made a choice that night to act when it would have been safer to stay silent. She had carried the weight of risk so that he could walk away. Her absence from the restaurant was its own kind of ending, but for him, it was also a beginning. It forced him to see his world differently, to recognize that not all rescues come in grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, scribbled in ink on a napkin, delivered by someone who then disappears without a trace. And though he might never cross paths with her again, he knew her act would remain with him, etched into memory as sharply as the words she had written. When the millionaire reflected on that night, the details returned to him in fragments: the soft hum of the restaurant, the sudden chill that gripped him when he read the note, the calculated steps he took toward the door, and the moment he saw the men rise in frustration after realizing he had slipped away. But what lingered most was not the fear, nor even the relief of escape. It was the quiet bravery of the waitress who had chosen to warn him. She had become, in his mind, the central figure of the entire story, the one who tipped the scales between survival and disaster. The more he thought about it, the more he understood that her decision carried layers of meaning. She could have stayed silent, serving his meal as if nothing were amiss, and no one would have suspected her of complicity. Instead, she acted with urgency, risking her own safety and even her livelihood. That single act changed everything. It reminded him that courage often does not come with fanfare or recognition. It comes in small moments, written on napkins, whispered in passing, carried out by those who may never be seen again. In his world, wealth had always seemed like the shield that kept danger at a distance. He had bodyguards, high walls, and security systems. Yet on that night, none of those protections were in place. His survival came from something money could not buy: the human instinct to protect another. The waitress had no obligation to him. She owed him nothing. And yet, she had extended to him the most valuable gift of all time: to escape. The mystery of her disappearance added weight to the lesson. He would never know her full story. He would never hear her explain why she had done it or what happened after she left the restaurant. Her absence became its own haunting message, a reminder that people who step into danger for the sake of others often bear the consequences in silence. She vanished from his world, but her choice followed him, shaping the way he saw himself and those around him. Over time, the napkin itself became more than a keepsake. He kept it locked away, not as evidence of fear, but as a symbol of perspective. Whenever he found himself absorbed in deals, profits, and the endless chase for more, he thought back to that note. It forced him to ask what truly mattered: the power of money or the value of life and the unseen acts that protected. The ending of that night did not arrive with dramatic confrontation or headlines. It ended quietly, with him driving away and the waitress disappearing into uncertainty. Yet within that quiet was something profound. It was the realization that not every story of survival is written in loud moments of triumph. Some are written in whispers, in hurried handwriting, and in the courage of someone who may never be thanked properly. For him, the ending was not closure but awareness. He had walked away alive, spared from danger by a stranger's hand. And though the world would move on without ever knowing what happened in that dimly lit restaurant, he would carry it always: the note, the warning, the escape, and the woman who gave him the chance to keep moving forward.